The whole world is watching junior hockey. But if you want to watch women's junior hockey, well, that just doesn't exist yet. But we're going to talk about why we have a men's World Juniors, but no women's worlds at the U20 level.
This is the Women's Hockey Report presented by Locked On NHL. Your weekly look at the world of women's hockey. From the PWHL to the international stage, it's the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Women's Hockey Report as part of Locked On NHL and the greater Locked On Podcast Network. And of course, we bring you your team or your sports every single day, or at least every week in our case. Erica L. Ayala, your host of Locked On Kraken, alongside Rachel Donner, one of your co-hosts of Locked On Flyers. Rachel, it's the holiday season. I celebrated a little Christmas. We're in the middle of Hanukkah and Kwanzaa. What is going on and what is good in your world right now?
Listen, I am still living in the repeated highlight of that Abby Boreen goal, like in Montreal's win over Toronto. Like, holy moly, like all the accolades in the world for that goal.
I mean, I am someone who loves defense. Everyone knows that about me. I cannot wait to talk a little bit about the work that Toronto's penalty kill unit had to do, because things definitely got hot in the PWHL. We're going to get into all of that. But first, we want to have a conversation. And we've talked about this before, Rachel, before we were officially the Women's Hockey Report. Of course, we had the Women's Hockey Spotlight. We've done some things for Olympic coverage. And we have had this debate, this conversation before. But since now we have our own flashy brand new show, we wanted to bring it back. World Juniors is happening right now. I've been talking about that on Locked On Kraken. The sporting world, with no NHL games, at least for another handful of days, is kind of flocking to this juniors tournament. But we don't see a tournament of this magnitude on the women's side, arguably in any age group, but specifically for the age group that covers, the men's World Juniors, there is no comparison on the women's side. Now, there is a youth tournament coming up. We're going to talk about that, but let's talk about it. Why do we not see a women's World Juniors in hockey?
It's a good question. And I think it raises a whole bunch of other questions, right, in terms of the whys of it. But I think that there has just been this thing where people don't think there's enough talented hockey players to support it. And I think it's part of that, and part of the fact that the U20 cohort may not make sense for women's hockey at the moment. Where you have a lot of the elite players of that age are in the NCAA hockey system, right? Or they're playing in Europe in those leagues. And it's, there really isn't room for it on the schedule. There isn't room for it in terms of number of players. Like, when do you put it on the international tournament calendar? Because they just go one after the other with the IIHF. There's so many factors here. And I think that, we got U18s with actual camera coverage. We should be grateful, I guess. I don't know.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's a throwback. We've definitely talked about that hot button topic. Not even hot button. I mean, just like an embarrassment when it comes to the quality of the youth women's tournaments that we get. You bring up a lot of interesting issue or topics that come up with this issue, with this conversation, this debate. And one of them, I think, is the unique, the uniqueness of where women's hockey is at the 20 to 22 age group versus men's. And I think some of that goes to when you go pro, or when your draft rights effectively go pro, versus in men's hockey versus women's hockey. So definitely want to get into that. But first, let's anchor this before we move forward and kind of try to answer some questions, or really just offer questions that we don't have answers to yet. Let's just anchor this in what we do know. So Rachel, first, for maybe people who are not familiar, let's talk about the World Juniors happening right now. I think at the time of our recording, we are in, what is it, day two?
Day two.
So what age groups are we talking about, and how is that how is that differentiated? What is the criteria when it comes to what we know as World Juniors, which is effectively, if I'm not mistaken, an under 20 tournament?
Correct. So these are all players that play at the junior level in their leagues. They're all under 20 years old, obviously, by the U20 characteristic of it all. So they're playing in North America. They're either playing in the USHL or in the Canadian hockey leagues like the WHL, the OHL, the Q, etc. And then in Europe, they're generally playing for club teams at the U20 level, and that's kind of where these players are drawn from. And some of them have already been drafted because, you get drafted at 18 or thereabouts, depending on the individual player.
Right,
But
right.
uh, but some of them are already drafted. Some of them are draft eligible for this upcoming year, and there's at least one or two that are draft eligible for following years because there's some
Right.
phenoms at 16 or 17 that are in this tournament.
Right. And if I remember correctly, so we're in the year 2024. It's considered, though, I think the 25 tournament, because the tournament will end in
Correct.
2025. So so it's the 25 tournament. So using the year 2025, you have to be at or under 20. But I guess anywhere from 15 to 20 in theory. That's your age in 2025. Right. And so when we think of that on the women's side, we do have a U18 tournament that's coming up, but it's really more of like the 18, 19, and 20-year-olds where things are very different. You mentioned juniors. They're playing in junior leagues in North America or in Europe. At 18, 19, 20, anyone who's looking to move forward, play for a national team, play now in the PWHL, before that was the NWHL, the PHF, the CWHL, or play overseas, you were at 18, 19, 20, likely playing for a college team in the NCAA, especially if you're from the United States or Canada. And we also have a lot of the super elite level European players that have done that as well. And so that's a little bit different when you're playing in that NCAA system as opposed to like a league. And we know on the men's side, some choose to go the NCAA route, whether they are draft eligible, like you mentioned, or they have already been drafted. But it seems to be more of the pathway to the NHL to actually go through the juniors, or at least as popular.
Yeah, there's college too, but similar to other men's college games, like guys leave school early and go pro, right?
Right. Exactly.
That doesn't really exist in women's.
No, that's not been a reality. And quite honestly, it still isn't at any level in women's professional sports. Like, for example, the WNBA doesn't have a feeder system. They don't even have a system for, college players who maybe don't make the league right away to play in like a quote unquote G league.
Exactly.
There's none of that. So that doesn't exist. So that's one of the reasons that this is a little bit tricky. But another thing, as far as rooting this in the facts, is that we've heard that the IIHF, the International Ice Hockey Federation, the governing body of international hockey, has said that they have been looking into doing something like a World Juniors on the women's side. But the last time we heard them say that, and that it was like, quote unquote, in the works, was in 2023. And we still don't have anything, Rachel.
Yeah. And, at the time they said that it was an ongoing process and it wouldn't happen right away for sure anyway. So that is understood. But I think, we would have expected at least an update on that to be like, no, we're targeting for 5 years down the road. And here's how we're going to get there. Here's how we're going to work with the NCAA. Here's how we're going to work with the federations to get there. You're like, nothing. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. But what we also have seen, and we mentioned this last time we talked about this topic, and so you can check that out on the Locked On NHL channel. We'll have a link in our show notes to that. The last time we talked about this, a year ago, effectively, Rachel. But Ian Kennedy has been one of the reporters kind of keeping up with what's happening on the women's side. And in the most recent reporting that we've seen from him, we talked about this kind of Euro tour, and instead of the USA Hockey and Hockey Canada federations pulling from the PWHL, like we talked about that on our last episode. We did see some of the European teams, like we talked about Chloe Arard, for example, Taylor Baker for Hungary, Chloe Arard for France. They did play in that Euro tournament. The USA and Canada actually did pull from their NCAA pool. Or players that have been in, who are in the NCAA, but also I think probably more what we should say is that they happen to be in the NCAA now, Rachel, but they have played at the U level for the USA and or Canada in the past. So again, the U8, like the U18 tournament that's coming up. So that's where these players came from in that tournament.
Right.
And it seems like maybe that was a test run to see what it would look like to have a tournament for women now, whether that's U18 or U20 or maybe even U22, but would that work with the NCAA schedule? And it seems like maybe this year in 2024 with that Euro tour, that was a little bit of a test run.
Yeah, it does. And I think it is a good first step. And that Euro tour obviously exists, with just the European teams for other weekends. And that is their own like mini version of a U20 tournament, right? Just in Europe. But to have something that's really sanctioned and worldwide, I think is the ultimate goal. And what the age threshold is, honestly, it could be different for women. And I don't think it makes sense to necessarily have it be the same as men, given the circumstances. And you can always change it as time goes on if the needs change.
Yeah, for sure. And here's the great thing about if you say it's U22, that still includes anyone that would be eligible for U20. So that's number one. But number two, it really hits where I think elite starts, like really, really starts in women's hockey, because you're, again, likely in the NCAA system because there's no feeder system for the PWHL. We already kind of talked about that. Similar to the WNBA or the NWSL, women's sports, I have thoughts on this, but almost all women's sports make it so you're not even draft eligible until you have 2 years of college. Now, there have been lawsuits. Olivia Moultrie, for example, has petitions through the court system to, at 18, join pro. But if you are born in the United States, you're expected to go through an NCAA system before you are draft eligible. So there's so many ways to take this. There's so many ways we could take this conversation. But I think in summary, before we actually talk about the tournament that does exist, Rachel, is that we want more women's hockey. Yep. IIHF, figure it out. I mean, that's in summary what we're talking about. But there is going to be a U18 tournament, Rachel. So what do folks need to know about that coming up?
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it more next week, right before it starts. But it is January 4th through the 12th. It's taking place in Finland. And there's 8 teams in that tournament, not just the USA and Canada and a couple of European teams. There's 8 teams. So just want to make that clear. There's very limited broadcasting of it in North America, where TSN is going to broadcast Team Canada and Team USA games. And then NHL Network's going to pull their feed for just the USA game. So we don't get the additional Canadian games. So very, very limited opportunities to watch that. And again, that's why we talk about wanting another higher level tournament that's in that mid-range, because then there's more opportunities to get eyes on these players.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, we're going to talk about it a little bit more. We want to really break down some of the nuances. We hope to have some representatives from USA Hockey be able to patch in and kind of give us the skinny on what to expect there. But we will do some of that next week. But coming up on the Women's Hockey Report, we had some exciting PWHL action. We do know, and we are thankful that we have that league. And Rachel, you're going to chime in and let us know know what your fan experience was like. We talked about that last week. That's all coming up on the Women's Hockey Report.
Today's episode is sponsored by Prize Picks. If you love sports, you're going to love Prize Picks. It's the best place to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Whether it's hockey, football, or any of your other favorite sports, Prize Picks makes it easy to get in on the action, and you can now win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. Plus, this holiday season, they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas and offering 2 free picks in December. And when your picks hit, Prize Picks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. Prize Picks also offers fun weekly promotions like Taco Tuesday, where select player projections are discounted up to 25%. So download that app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly. Prize Picks, run your game.
And thank you, as always, for joining us on Locked On NHL, but specifically those who join us on Saturday for the Women's Hockey Report. Erica L. Ayala alongside Rachel Donner. We talked a little bit about why there isn't a Women's World Juniors equivalent, but also, of course, if you are watching World Juniors, hope your team's doing great. But whatever that looks like, the Seattle Kraken have several prospects in, so that's something exciting we've been talking about. But Rachel, we also know that there was lots of excitement on the ice and, really a battle for some spots in the standings this past weekend. You were at one of those games, but, let's take folks through. Let's start with any changes at the top of the standings.
Well, no. I mean, there was a battle for sure, and we'll get to that Minnesota versus New York game. But I think that the Montreal versus Toronto game was very important for many reasons. I think Montreal needed something to get over this hump of playing against Toronto and getting a win. We talked last week on the show about Toronto being on the struggle bus a little bit and, having some issues with chemistry and putting together complete games. And this was kind of no different. And Montreal actually did get that win.
Yeah, they've still got some things to figure out. Good old Toronto. But we got to see not a Marie-Philippe Poulin overtime game winner, but I mean, by proxy, by like association, does she get credit?
Maybe the next best thing, right?
Of course, her wife Laura Stacey comes up with it, which is exciting. Laura Stacey
is a fantastic goal too.
Yeah, so. She's got an exciting game. Now, as someone who watches USA hockey and is not always rooting for USA, if I'm being honest, but definitely tends to favor them over Canada. I don't always like watching her play internationally, but that is a testament to how spicy she can truly be on the ice. Great win for Montreal over Toronto. Montreal kind of in that middle of the pack right now. Toronto trying to get out of the basement to no avail. But there was also some spiciness, and we actually got a suspension that came from this game. Let's talk about it. We even got the little player safety video, so we're back to those. The NWHL OGs know about those, but I think you never want to see a major penalty. That usually means that that's a big, you can't do that on the ice. So tell me what went down there.
Yeah, so Ryland McKinnon gave a headshot to Amanda Boulier, and it was not good. And so, Boulier was out for the rest of the game, and Montreal had to sign an additional player off their reserve list to account for that injury. Ryland McKinnon was then suspended a game for that hit.
Yeah.
And I think, when all is said and done, I think the suspension was warranted because you don't want headshots in the game. And I appreciate the women's game getting more physical and, when I talk about the fan experience, I'll talk about some people that wanted maybe some fighting in the women's game. But um, I think it's good that they're kind of coming down on it and just making sure there are some consequences when these things happen.
Yeah, I think hockey overall is really looking at contact above the shoulders and being very serious with that. So it is a little bit of an adjustment for some folks, but one game suspension. You mentioned that Amanda Boulier, boo. What was that, to the hit or to Boulier? You decide. But Amanda Boulier out for a little bit maybe, but either way, Montreal has signed Catherine Daou, as you mentioned, from their reserve list. Boulier, we'll have to see what's going on there. Also, though, because of the suspension, it's a 1-game suspension, but Toronto signs Jess Condas to a 10-day contract, also coming from their reserves. She's been there since last season. So it will be interesting to see, especially given that Toronto is looking for some wins, if they make any changes to the roster. Yeah, beyond just the suspension.
Yeah, I think so. I think, the other thing that came out of that, for me at least, is that the goaltending in Toronto is a big question mark. Reagan Kirk got her first start in that game. She had come in relief in their previous game and kind of earned this start for them. But, 29 saves, 35 shots. Like, it was a really challenging game, and especially like losing it in overtime on like that Laura Stacey shot was great. Like, I don't blame her, but I think that goaltending is going to get unnecessary blame for Toronto.
Yeah, I feel like we should definitely have, this has actually been something we have put on our notes for a little bit here, but I think, at the top of the year in 2025, we'll have enough data to really have a conversation about goaltending for this season. But I also think it's worth taking a retrospective look, because I think that you see that the PWHL teams, generally speaking, took an interesting approach to goaltending, and I'm curious if Toronto maybe kind of missed the wave on that, but we can talk about that. I think also, though, with respect to goaltending, a goaltender was honored, and we've talked about Erica Howe in the past. And, speaking of Toronto goaltenders, she and Carly Jackson did a really fun video where Erica Howe got a mullet. But Erica Howe has been battling breast cancer, for those who don't know. We've mentioned it before. And, Toronto and Montreal, even though it's very spicy on the ice, they really came together to honor Erica Howe and her battle. I think you should definitely go check out the video. Very moving. And Erica has said from the beginning, we read her, her post on social media, like she wants people to be supportive of her fight. She's not really looking for I'm sorry's and sympathy. She really is focused on doing the best that she can do and putting herself around people and in a position to get back to health. And I think it was great to see the PWHL community really support her in that.
Yeah, I think so. It was really, really wonderful to see, especially because the game ended in such dramatic fashion.
It really, really did, Rachel. We are going to talk, though, about the other game that happened, because you were there. It was also a dramatic way to finish a game. And we'll go through the standings and let you know what is on tap coming up this weekend, or this week, I should say, as we get ready for 2025. All that coming up next on the Women's Hockey Report. Today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report brought to you by our new friends over at Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? I have been using Rocket Money for a little bit, and Especially as someone who sometimes has subscriptions for personal, like for my personal life and then my professional life, I realize that I'm overpaying for things, and Rocket Money has really helped me organize, see where I can maybe just consolidate to one account and then just kind of expense things on the back end, and definitely make sure that I am budgeting properly. Excuse me. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spending, like I just mentioned, and can even help lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place. And that's what has been huge for me, truly. Like having everything on one screen, not having to open all of my accounts, is what I love, whether it's subscriptions, spending habits, or even goals you want to hit in the year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of 500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features, including the subscription tracker to help cancel those services you no longer use. And so, again, I use Rocket Money. I've really liked it. And if you want to reach your financial goals faster, you can do so with Rocket Money. Just go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on. Again, rocketmoney.com/locked-on, and join me in this lovely financially and fiscally responsible savings spree, or something like that. At least that's what I hope for, because I still have my indulgences, Rachel. Thanks as always for joining us on the Women's Hockey Report, part of Locked On NHL and the Locked On Podcast Network. Rachel Donner, I am Erica Ayala, and Rachel, you got to attend the other PWHL game that went down. You had Montreal. We had Montreal and Toronto. And then we also had Minnesota and New York. So we're Montreal trying to get out of that middle of the pack, Toronto trying to get out of the basement. You got to watch the top two teams get to work. And I think just from the box score alone, it did not disappoint.
Yeah, it was, it did not start out great for the home team. I will say that, but Minnesota wound up winning in a shootout. I would say it was pretty heartbreaking for Sirens fans, just because they did come back to tie it up 3-3. Eventually, those first two goals, both scored by Kendall Quinn Schofield. And the second one was a real bummer. Abby Levy made a real, I would say, poor choice in terms of playing the puck along the boards the wrong way. Kendall Coyne was right there and, pots it home. She winds up getting pulled after that period, only 3 saves on 5 shots. And she was replaced by Kaylee Osborne, who played generally well for the rest of the game, 18 saves on 19 shots in that game, especially when Nicole Hensley is at the other end. It's, it's always difficult to face her in a goaltending duel there. But I think, generally, New York really did a good job of just keep going at it. They had more shots in the game. And I think that they really defensively, after those first 2 goals, just kind of shut it down for Minnesota. And Minnesota looked very beatable, very vulnerable for a good chunk of that game. And, I will say, especially that doggedness, that aggressiveness on the forecheck that the Sirens had led to that tying goal. They battled to stay in the zone, and Carpi just picks up the puck and pots it for the 3-3 tying goal. And I just think that was due to the hard work of a lot of people on the New York Sirens. It was a true team effort, in my opinion.
I mean, you take on the metropolitan area as your home. Then you really double down by naming your team the Sirens. No, not after a mythical creature, but after all of the noise we constantly hear in the metro area. You're expecting, or I would imagine people are going to expect exactly what you just described, a scrappy, never say die kind of team. And so that's why New York sports fans, I know I live in Tulsa now, but come on. I'm from New York. We are very passionate fans. We ride or die. And if you're a Mets fan like me, sometimes it's less of the ride and more of the just utter despair. But I digress. Like you said, it's a tough game to lose for the Sirens, but especially because, like you said, didn't seem like Minnesota had their top game. And that's, as we say about goaltenders, sometimes it just seems like this is a game that New York kind of wants back, right? If they had a chance to do some of the small things over again, maybe they would push a little bit harder, stay focused. As you mentioned, Abby Levy, who was fantastic for technically PWHL New York last year, really fighting for time behind Corrine Schroeder, but that's going to happen. You're not going to have a perfect night. It's just that one, that one mistake, and you don't want to make a mistake when Kendall Coyne-Schofield is on the ice. But for the Minnesota side, I mean, this is a team that's still at the top of the table. If we look at the standings going into the games that we have this weekend, they sit at top, the only team in double digits in points, 10 points right now. And then New York right behind them with 8 points. So I'm curious to see, though, if both of these teams, Rachel, are going to be able to stay at the top once we get to the 25 part of the season. Or did you see maybe a few chinks in the chain that maybe a team like Montreal, Boston can take advantage and expose some of what wasn't working for these teams?
I think so. I think this Minnesota team is very beatable. And we saw that like in the season opener too. Yeah. Like they did not look great for the entire game, but they're finding ways to win. And that's the thing that these other teams have to get over.
Right.
Now, in this case, finding a way to win was, I just watched Taylor Heisey skate out there before her, penalty or for the shootout. And I was like, yeah, she's got this. And she did. And it was fine for them. But like, I think that's been the difference maker with this team, is that even if they don't play their best, they find ways to win, and other teams need to do better at that. And that's a hard thing to do.
It is tough, but you know what? That's that championship mentality. And Minnesota, they are the reigning champions. So there's a saying that we hear in hockey all the time. They don't care how, they just care how many. And the Minnesota team, they have the most wins. They have the most points on the season. Now, again, I do think that once we start seeing some of these younger players, the true rookies, start to get acclimated to the game, you never know what's going to happen when it comes down to injuries. We've already seen some players get called up. As much as you like that gritty win for Minnesota, they also have to refine their game. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how things pan out. But Rachel, what is on tap? Who are we going to see in action? And is there any game in particular that you have circled?
Yeah, I think, I do want to see, honestly, the game on Monday between Boston and Montreal.
Me too.
I think that's the highlight here, because I think that Montreal, coming off this win, they're going to want to keep it going, right? And Boston is fighting for respect in a lot of ways in this league in terms of not accidentally making it, right? And I just think the Boston-Montreal sports rivalry in hockey is already there, and it continues to grow on the women's hockey side. And so to me, that's the key game of the next stretch.
I completely agree. I would say, just for the fun of it, I'm also going to toss in Toronto and Ottawa. We've already seen these two teams play, but I think it's the something's got to give classic. One of these teams has got to figure it out sooner than later, right? I mean, Ottawa, technically Toronto, they are in the basement, right? But Ottawa just, I think that it's there and then it's not. I don't know exactly what's going on with Ottawa. So I think that could be an interesting game as well. And then, of course, there's on January 2nd, Boston versus Minnesota in Minnesota. So maybe that goes back to what we were saying. Is this a Boston team that again, it's not just, oops, look, I landed in the final. Like, are they the real deal? Well, here's your chance to prove it this week. They've got a really heavy slate here. But we, of course, will be back next week to talk about it and everything that happened. And, of course, to get you ready for the Women's World Juniors, the U18 tournament, which is happening in Finland. We talked about that. But, Rachel, where can folks find you?
I am at our Miriam on Blue Sky and Twitter, though really just on Blue Sky these days.
Same.
And of course on the Locked On Flyers podcast.
For sure. And again, my name is Erica L. Ayala, also hanging out on Blue Sky. You can find me. I finally got eLindsay08 back. Twitter would not give it back to me. I've got it on Blue Sky. And of course, you can also find me at Black Rosie Media and Locked On Kraken. But for Rachel, my name is Erica. And again, you have been listening to the Women's Hockey Report on Locked On NHL. And of course, thank you for making us a part of your daily destination. For your second listen, head over, to Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And until next Saturday, I hope you enjoy your holiday season. Happy New Year. Or I guess, yes, Happy New Year. Yes, it will be the new year by the time we record, Rachel. I don't know. What day is it? What year is it? Who even knows around this time of year? Enjoy the holidays. We'll see you in 2025. Peace out, everybody.